The other thing, I just wanted to make a point that was raised by Bishop Hagman at the beginning about headline writing. After 25 years in daily newspapers, 17 years in magazines, and 4 years as public editor of the Catholic Register, I'm fairly confident in knowing what constitutes a headline. Man slams is a headline. Man leaves in somewhat state of agitation after losing a Jesuitical argument. Whatever else that is, it's not a headline. It's too long to fit the space.
So many verbs you can use.
What's that?
There's only so many verbs.
There's only words. So you know what? One of the things that you have to do in the media business, and we're going to get into this, you have to have an impact. You know, it doesn't have to be extreme. It doesn't have to be overdone. And it is far too much these days, to the point that was being made. But sometimes a slam door is a slam door. So you have to stick with that. So I'm just going to go through the panel here, and I'm not going to do formal introductions. They can introduce themselves in terms of responding to what we're going to talk about, and then hopefully they'll be quick enough that we can get questions from you, and we can have that conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Luke. Luke is a young Catholic building a career in media. You started in 23 with the Catholic Register, and then you left for a little while, and then you, like the prodigal son, came back. Did I say that out loud? And you returned to the fold. And I guess where I'd like to start with you, Luke, is why you came back. You're a devout Catholic. You live a Catholic life. You went through journalism school. You could have gone pretty much anywhere, but you came back to journalism, Catholic journalism. Why is that? What about you? What about the appeal of Catholic journalism brought you back?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks everyone for stopping in. Appreciate it. And, it's great to be with you, Peter, and everyone else here. So it is a great question about what brought me back, and I think it goes back to my time in journalism school and in J school, which gave me a really good foundation of sort of the principles of journalism. Durham College in Oshawa, yeah, just a bit out of the city. Had a really good understanding of the craft, I think. Like you said, you can kind of take that craft and do as you please with it wherever.
What constitutes a headline?
Exactly, yeah, some of the hard skills, right? But something I always really appreciated about journalism was the ability to find the person within the story and really get away from statistics or headlines, or I guess we can consider hard news in a sense, more so what's led to that hard news, what's behind that hard news. So, like you said, I took some time to explore some other avenues that weren't necessarily Catholic based. I was always sort of drawn back to this idea of what can we do as journalists to explore people and people's stories, and I think a lot of Catholic social teaching is really revolving around what we can do, tell people's stories and tell it in an effective way, in a way that's respectful, and that's something that I've always been drawn to. So I think that's one of the main reasons that I've come back, and I think a lot of the articles I've been able to do and topics I've been able to write about in different beats. That's the other thing, is that I didn't really appreciate, maybe being a tech journalist or a crime reporter or sports or entertainment. Being a Catholic journalist and not a Catholic journalist, is kind of the distinction between those two, allows you to really write about everything, because what you're writing about is sort of the core of humanity, really, in each of these stories, no matter what the beat is, whether it's, how someone responds to a crime story, or an athlete maybe that has a particular passion for his faith. It kind of bridges all these different beats, and that's something that I found really, really compelling.
When you were doing your journalism program, did you find it difficult to do a journalism program in a secular institution? I recommended a young woman for the master's program where I used to teach at Concordia, and she left not long after she started because she said I couldn't walk into the classroom every day with a target on my back. people knowing I was Catholic. Did you experience
I
that?
wouldn't say to that extent. There's definitely some trickiness with how you tackle things, and you want to be morally respectable, which isn't always easy in a secular newsroom. It's not always easy in a Catholic newsroom either, though. So you kind of have to know how to get around things a little bit. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily difficult to do my education in a secular environment. You just kind of have to be cognizant of what your goal is when you're producing a story or when you're chasing a story. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's not always the immediate headline or maybe what's going to get you the most clicks. You have to be very aware of what you're writing and what you're looking to convey. And if it comes back to Catholic social teaching, which hopefully a lot of my articles and other Catholic journalist articles do, it's not as difficult. I will say it's kind of interesting. I do have a fair amount of friends that keep up with Catholic news. I have probably a substantially more amount of people in my life that are unaware of what Catholic news is. I tell them I'm a reporter for a Catholic newspaper. They have no idea what that means, right? Sometimes I don't really know exactly what it means, but I think there was a quote that I had heard that is really great, and it's something along the lines of a Catholic shoemaker fulfills his duty not by putting crosses on the shoes he makes, but by making really good shoes. And I think that kind of goes back to the idea of Catholic journalism. And we're not here to, well, maybe we are, but I think there's more to Catholic journalism than making a complex church document readable to the public. That's certainly part of it, but I think there's so much more than that. And it's about having good, honest stories that go back to Catholic social teaching, whether that's solidarity, compassion, things like that.
Yeah, that's the ongoing conversation we've had for a couple of years about what is Catholic journalism. And you've got some people who say, well, every story should be trying to evangelize through. And
I don't think so.
Laura and I and others say, no, you do Catholic journalism by doing journalism well.
Yeah.
Just like a mechanic, he does Catholic mechanic auto work by doing a good job, and that's how his faith is presented to the community.
Although, I'll kind of move to Randy in a minute, but just as an example of Catholic journalists looking at a story as a Catholic, you recently broke a story about a thing called Jesus AI, because you were on the web and you saw this scam from some shady outfit in Los Angeles that was charging people $35 to be closer to Jesus through an AI chatbot. And I don't know, but I think a lot of, let's use the word secular journalists, which is look at that and go, yeah, and they go, yeah, the pages are everywhere. But you said, whoa, wait a minute, what are the implications of it, right? Talk a bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example where I think a lot of other journalists might look at that as that's a fantastic news piece, not maybe for the reason that I was thinking it was going to be a fantastic news piece. That's maybe to another journalist a great artificial intelligence design or invention or some sort of breakthrough. But I get red in the face even thinking about it, because I remember seeing it and just being so blown away by what the implications are with this and what that means for our faith as a whole and what it means for maybe unsuspecting people who don't even have an understanding of where that can lead you. So when you break open that story and you talk to different church scholars, theologians, people involved between the realms of faith and artificial intelligence, you're really able to develop a story that almost comes across, I don't want to say as a warning, but it gives this whole other side to the story that I don't think you would find in a secular media outlet, which is just explaining what the product is, telling you how much it costs. There's a whole other side to that story that Catholic journalism is concerned with, and that was a pleasure to be able to sort of share that.
And how dangerous it is to your moral system, which is what we talk about in the secular media. So, Randy, you're a university professor at UNT and with St. Michael's. You teach both Catholic and non-Catholic students. But you had a wonderful piece that the Globe and Mail actually approached you about in December, that being Catholic is quasi-cool again, or even maybe fully cool, I don't know, do we know? But so you're a novelist, you've got a new novel coming out in September. So you kind of you're in the academic world, but I want to talk a little bit about the piece that you just published in the Atlantic, but you kind of make use of the media I mean that in any kind of, I mean that in a very positive way. And you use the media for particular purposes, or have been, and you've taken the advantage of the opportunities. But you cross all those kind of what we would see as boundaries, right? How do you do that, and while maintaining like a very very public Catholic in an academic environment, in the Globe and Mail, in a magazine like that? What are the challenges with that? Or do you just, look, this is what I'm doing, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. Too bad.
I would say that, this is me just now making it up as I go along for a moment. I am, by most accounts, a working writer, academic, university administrator who writes for the public and also writes novels. And I write about books, I write about ideas, and I write about the world at large and the ways in which religion, and often Catholicism, figures in important, germane, interesting ways in the world at large. And I think, if you talk about it in vocational terms, we all have to figure out a way to be good mechanics. And some people are good mechanics on some cars, and some people are good mechanics on other cars. And for whatever set of reasons related to my sensibility, my disposition, the things I want to write about, I am far more frequently asked to write about books, ideas, religion for secular places than for Catholic. Of course, I write for First Things, Commonweal, etc. But for whatever reason, the primary outlets that want me to contribute to them tend to be secular outlets. And likewise, I'm often thought of as a Catholic novelist, but I publish my fiction with secular presses.
And you hate Flannery O'Connor's.
And I hate Flannery O'Connor's. No matter how many things I write, let me do one line I'll be remembered for. Anyway, I think we're called in our vocations to respond to the moment and the opportunity put before you. I didn't pitch the Globe and Mail on being Catholic again. I didn't pitch the Atlantic on the new encyclical. They came to me and said, "Would you write about this for us?"
Yeah.
And I was glad to do so. But I think probably, maybe because I'm a bit of a boundary crosser in a lot of ways, I think I have standing in a lot of different places at once. It allows me maybe to make credible cases. I am, as you say, I'm a public Catholic. I'm openly Catholic.
Yeah.
But I'm openly Catholic in almost always secular contexts. And that's where I have ended up vocationally and professionally. And so these are the kinds of cars I'm asked to work on. These are the cars I'm going to work on as best I can.
But when you deal with the editors of those publications, do you get, and keep the Holy Mother Church stuff down at the bottom paragraphs because nobody reads them anyway. Do you get that kind of direction?
Not at all. Never. I'm just trying to think for a moment. Even in this piece I just published in the Atlantic, I went back and forth with my editor on a variety of elements in it, but by no means was there some centering on, I'm talking about the incarnation in this piece for the Atlantic.
Yeah.
I'm pretty open about what I describe as the scandal of particularity. And it's not so much, no, you can't do this, it's how do we make sure you can do this well? And so maybe for me, where that comes from, this was probably very formative for me, was when I was in graduate school, I started reading First Things magazine. And I realized that you could be a religiously serious person who cared about culture, economics, and then I found Commonweal, and I realized it even more. And I started to realize there was a way to do this. That maybe as an ethnic devotional Catholic from the GTA, I had never really seen. There was religious life, and then there was the rest of my life. And the way that I started to figure out that the life of faith and the life of the mind could intersect eventually led me to an interest sufficient that I ended up writing a biography of Father Richard John Newhouse. And of course, one of his core contributions, I think, as a Catholic, as a Christian thinker in the late 20th century, was the idea that we're called to make publicly available arguments that draw on religiously informed and ordered principles and ideas. And so when I'm writing for these places, I'm writing for them out of a sensibility where I'm trying to make a publicly available argument so that whether or not you believe in the Christian proposition, you can still derive some good from this piece. But that's almost a little too easy. Oh, good, you believe in something, and you believe in something. And so the way that I try to, I think, maybe advance things a little further would be to make it publicly available, but demonstrate irreducibly the goods of the Christian proposition itself. And so I'll end on this point, near the end of this piece for The Atlantic, I make the case that I explicitly talk about why Pope Leo thinks humanity is magnificent. And humanity is magnificent because God took human form, because a teenage girl in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago said yes to the message of an angel. And as a result, we are endowed as created beings with a value, a dignity, and a purpose that ultimately has a divine significance to it. And I basically argue this is why humanity is magnificent. I mean, he's riffing on the Magnificat in no small way, I think, even with the title of this encyclical. And what if you don't have that account? What if you don't have the Christian proposition to explain why humanity is magnificent? Well, then AI isn't the way, unless you can find something higher than only, I think, the kind of mundane secular humanism to balance. So I'm happy to get into those arguments with people, but I do some ways that are publicly available while at the same time being very open about my thinking.
In the Atlantic piece, though, there's two sentences that just jumped out at me, and they are near the end. Humanity, not technology, is responsible for this polycrisis. Mm-hmm. And that sounds, sorry for this, but I can hear Flannery saying, we write about freaks because we still recognize them.
Yes.
And the other sentence is, the single question of the digital age isn't what to do about AI. That's secondary. The question is, what does it mean? What does it take to be human? Mm-hmm. I read pretty widely. My wife is always saying, why is there nose in another book or in a newspaper or whatever, but I don't think I would ever read that. And I'll put it another way. If I read that, I go, is this person Catholic?
Right.
That would be one of the first questions I would. Talk just a little bit about including those kinds of sentences and what you're trying to get at there. I mean, because it is the essence of Catholic faith, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think, every justification specific to that article because I'm making sense of what Pope Leo has to say about the rise of artificial intelligence. And the easy version of it, just simply, if you haven't seen it, is that if we think this encyclical is about AI, we're making a big mistake. The encyclical is about how we've lost a higher order understanding of the human person and of human dignity. That's the upstream question, and he answers it through the Christian proposition. So he has an answer to what does it mean, what does it take to be human. It takes God taking human form and dying and rising for our sins, etc., etc. When I think about the question you're asking, Peter, it is often the case, whether I'm giving a talk on civil discourse or someone's reading one of my novels, where they'll pause and think, I can tell this is Catholic, likely because the person is themselves Catholic. Mm-hmm. And then they find it unexpected because they're not reading it in our Sunday Visitor, they're reading it in the Atlantic. And so that's why, but that's my vocation. That's what I've been called to do. They're reading it in a secular novel published by a secular press. And so I'm not intentionally preaching, it's just intellectually, at that point in that essay, at this point in this novel, at this point in this talk, it makes sense to draw on the fullest possible account of who we are and why we matter. And for me, that comes from the Catholic intellectual tradition. Yeah. And so that's basically how I approach it. I'll say one other thing, kind of more in-house, but just to counteract our sense that maybe at times there's too much of a binary between quote, us and them. That second formulation, Peter, was entirely me. The first formulation came from my editor working with me
Oh, really?
to massage and help me refine a thicker version of the same claim. But he superbly articulated it.
You Catholic?
I don't know. But the point is, whether he's Catholic or not, he's an excellent editor. You see what I'm
When
saying?
you've got a relationship with an editor, a publication, you adapt, right, to their
Yeah, they know you and you go back and forth a little
What
bit.
you offer to them is going to be different than the way you offer something to another publication.
See, here, that's the difference. I would write the same thing for Commonweal of First Things.
But not for the New York Times.
No, but of course for the New York Times. I write about Catholic stuff for the New York Times all the time.
In the exact same language.
In the exact same language.
New York Times is pretty open.
Yeah. No, I think, see, that's my vocation, is to write verbatim an essay for the New York Times or First Things. That's the goal that I have in my writing. Because I'm still working on a card either way.
But let me just pick up on that. In your vocation as well, as a teacher, as a person who guides young people and young minds, how do, like on the kind of demand side of the equation, you're providing the supply side, but on the demand side, how do we, obviously we can't demand, but how do we make sure that Randy Boyagoda doesn't suffer the Flannery fate of being the only one? I wish you all, like, publish as much as you want and more, but how do we avoid that? Because I know this is, and I'm joking around about it, but it irritates you about that Flannery is the only one we
Oh, I see.
as a Catholic writer. He's just the only one that's top of mind.
Yeah.
When, as you already said many times, there are lots more out there.
Yeah.
How do we as Catholics on the demand side
Yeah.
start saying, look, okay, great, New York Times will publish it. Not that we want to, turn everything into encyclicals, but how do we get more of that stuff in our media?
Well, we read Jan Fosse, the Nobel laureate, who is a very serious Catholic, for instance, about whom I've written about the New York Times a couple of times. Again, verbatim as I would anywhere else. But I think this goes back to that Flannery O'Connor complaint essay that I wrote. At this point, maybe, Peter, is you can imagine where I'm going with this. In that article, which I wrote for First Things about 10 years ago or so, I was lamenting that the reason I'm sick of Flannery O'Connor and Tolkien and Chesterton and Dostoevsky is because what do they all have in common? They're all dead. And when you're a living writer, all you hear about are dead writers from Catholic readers. And I basically made the case that we're confirming the very thing we're complaining about if we only read dead Catholic writers, because then the publishers hear that and say, great, we'll just keep the Tolkien backlist going and those people will just keep on reading that over and over again. Let's find something else he wrote. Oh, he signed this phone book. We'll give it a weird sounding title and we'll say it's another one of the found novels. And they're so dumb, they'll buy it, right? Whereas if you are willing to take a chance on living Catholic writers and engage in what as an academic I would call canon formation, where you're demonstrating that you're engaged with something happening in the here and now. This writer matters in the here and now. I think that would be the way to do it. I'll just say practically, to skip a question if anyone's wondering, if you look at things like Dappled Things, the Catholic literary journal, if you look at the Catholic Imagination Conference, there's a movement around it in terms of contemporary Catholic writing. These are places where there's a lot of active contemporary Catholic writing. And then there's people like Phil Clay, Chris Beha, Kirsten Quay Lopez, I got that wrong, and me, in terms of contemporary Catholic writers who write basically just for secular places. So I think it's just finding these things and reading them.
And I guess by doing that, the extrapolation is publishers will go, well, there's a market.
There's a market.
Yeah.
There's a fascinating article in the latest issue of The New Yorker on Chosen. I mean, when I say Chosen, yes, it's this phenomenon. And it's a prestige-like retelling of the Bible, of the New Testament, I guess, specifically, that's I think 6 seasons in, millions of people watch this all over the world, and the great insight of this piece from secular places that are now fully supporting and broadcasting this very, very Christian take on the New Testament, is that fan culture drives business decisions when it comes to TV and film. And you can imagine if more and more people simply start buying these books by contemporary Catholic writers, out of pure business sense, we need to provide more of this.
Or interacting with publications that publish.
Or interacting with public, yeah, exactly. It strikes me as not Catholic, but frankly Protestant, to stay away from the secular world. Right? We're supposed to set forth into the deep. We're supposed to be there. We always are there. And this is my last point. This is true in campus life as much as media life. I don't ask anyone who I work with about their own faith affiliations, on campus or off. But you would be, I am surprised, no longer, I used to be surprised at how many practicing Catholics, how many religiously serious Christians there are in elite places. They're just not public about it. And not because they're scared, they're just a different disposition than I have.
Yeah.
But they feel very much affirmed, likewise with my students, affirmed by seeing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're not alone that way.
Yeah. Several years ago now, I was to a woman in Montreal was very, very involved with on the QT with pro-life action, especially around euthanasia. And I was stunned to learn that she was Catholic because she never, she's never.
But she wasn't hiding it. Probably just wasn't her.
She was afraid. She went.
Oh, so she wasn't.
She went to mass one day and hid behind a pillar, and I noticed like 7 or 8 or 10 of her colleagues were there too.
Yeah.
They were all as afraid as she was. So yeah, maybe it's 90% of it is just showing up. I'm going to move on to Dominic Chan. Dominic, we saw you this morning fixing microphones and going around taking photos, and you're more on the really kind of hardware, pragmatic side of things. You're a web guy, you're a photographer, you do event photography and all those kind of things. But you are, you're an integral part of Catholic conscience. You're involved in Catholic activities and profound Catholic yourself. So from that perspective, at that end of things, I mean, I guess the one question, and you and I have talked a bit about this, do you find in the course of the work that you're doing that the simple speed at which you have to produce things, I mean, not just being quick up to the stage to get the microphone fixed, but having to produce stuff quick, actually impinges, whether it's photos or whether it's text, on the ability to approach things with a formed, or with an active, I should say, Catholic conscience. That it doesn't, you have to get it out. You don't have time to really decide, is this a proper treatment of a human being or not?
Speed is, turnaround time is getting shorter and shorter because I produce visual content on the media side. I came from the newswire publishing IT side of business, and then I flipped to the graphic content illustrations and whatnot. But speed is getting worse and worse and worse. Before I even click the picture, my editor say, "Where's the picture?" So it does make your judgment, you basically throw the judgment away sometimes because you're so rushed for a deadline. Because I work for the secular press. One of my biggest clients is the Quebecois Media. So that, where's the pictures? They're fighting with the Montreal Gazette. So you don't have time to think. You click and you send it off. The only thing that's trying to stay me in the ground is being a Catholic, Catholic educated plus other Christian educated. You try to tell the truth. Is that picture representative of that event? It's all the only thing I can say about it. Because at that point in time, that's my only guideline. If I send a picture that does not represent that event, then obviously I'm not doing my job. Second of all, as a human person, human being, I'm failing because I'm basically a lie. Yeah. It's an AI lie, I'm using a real lie. So I think with AI advancing, because again, we start to touch on the AI topics, it's getting worse because in one of my publications I'm involved in, Catholic Insight, I not only play the web guy to deal with the problem, I also the photo editor now. So I go through the picture, like, that doesn't work, we need to find a picture. In fact, in some of the last 6 months, I start to use AI generated pictures for the article because I cannot find anything that fit. So I have to describe AI, well, this is what I'm looking for. I may send them a reference picture from the AP wire and say, generate me something I can use that I'm not infringing on someone's right. And I think that will become more and more.
How does that work true, though, I'm curious? To your earlier point.
I'm still telling the story based, for example, I think one of the AI pictures I generated was Pope Leo in some kind of a meeting form, which we don't have the right to that pictures, but I need to put something in the article. So I type in the description what I want. I said, here's a bunch of reference pictures, and they generate a cartoon rendering. I specifically say, don't generate a real picture, generate illustrations.
Okay, that's
And how do you credit it?
I create AI generated.
okay.
I think that's a very good point, Paul. You mentioned. What I find is a lot of people just throw stuff out there. They write whatever they want, but they're not describing what that picture actually is and how it may be related to the article. But it is also true sometimes we have to generate graphic content for an article that hasn't been written yet.
Yeah, right.
So for us who are the graphical creator, the balance is
But it's graphics, it's not a fake picture.
No, yeah. So I have to say, when I use the AI generation, I use illustration. I use the word AI generated illustrations so that people know that this is not a real thing. It is a combination of something.
Right. Has you or your publication received any pushback or backlash from viewership on doing that? Because I've seen it a few
No,
places now.
it's actually no one. No, we haven't. And part of it is I have to increase the viewership, so I think that graphical content. This is where I a little bit different from a writer is. You guys use headline to stop someone keep browsing. I have to use a graphic content to stop someone keep scrolling up the page. So sometimes I think we need to work both hand in hand and say, what's your title and what's my pictures in there, so that we can stop to get your viewership in on that.
You know, Luke reminded me of this just as we were chatting before the session started. And this is maybe an example of where Catholic conscience does kick into it. Luke, jump in if you've got comments to make about this. But yeah, I was relating to one of our story meetings some time ago. I was shooting football in Edmonton years ago, working for the Edmonton Sun newspaper. And one of their veteran players, it was his last hurrah, and they were getting their butts kicked. They were really getting beaten badly, and he was playing really badly. He was just tired, and he had this hangdog look on his face. He was sitting on the bench, just exhausted, and like, you could have written failure in bright pink letters across his forehead. And I put up my camera, and I was going to shoot him, and then I said, no, I'm not shooting him. Because I know what they're going to do with this picture, and I'm not going to subject him, even though he's a professional athlete, to that kind of humiliation. And the thought went through my head, what if the other guys get it? And I looked around and there was nobody else going to shoot it. I'm not doing it. When somebody else made a mistake of mentioning that I hadn't shot it, they jumped all over me. So those are the kind of pressures you're under, right? What would you have done in that?
Although in a sense that reflected reality, right?
Yeah, but a reality that's going to humiliate it.
Reality, dignity, attention, reality.
Yeah.
Sorry? Dignity though counteracts. You take a picture of someone using the bathroom, that's reality. But
Wouldn't they look at that and say, oh man, I feel his pain?
Yeah.
It's a hard call.
It is,
Because one side, you are working for someone, your job is to get that content for that publication, wherever that may be.
Yeah.
The other side is, well, if the shoes are flipped, do I want to be, my set face? Because you're right, that picture will be used for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
The happy picture won't get used.
Yeah.
And before I went into the news business, I was in the paparazzi business. So our job is chase the worst picture you can find.
Yeah.
Because that picture will run 20 times.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and you use the word content, that it became, I mean, I didn't obviously have time to think about it in these terms, but I've thought about it since then. You're reducing a human being to content. Well, you know what, that's what we do. So where do you draw the
I
line?
mean, the definitive example, the football kicking, was it Joe Clark or Stanfield?
Oh, yeah, dropping the football.
Yeah, he successfully caught the ball
Yeah,
20 times.
times.
The one time he dropped it, everybody
That's
took
a
the photo,
picture.
and that's the photo that they had, and it influenced the election
Yeah.
that followed.
So I'm gonna, on that note, I'm gonna throw it open, like what are his thoughts around the table here? We've got a few minutes.
I wanted to ask you guys, as an outsider, Catholic, I know the American church, the Latin American church, and what I found about our church here is that there's an emphasis on being nice, doing your job well, being agreeable, congratulating each other for being Catholic, as opposed to, let's say, the American church, where I see engagement with the seculars, or the secular realm. I see a critical assessment of the system, a sign of contradiction, a fight of the gospel. I mean, people are having a sense of, we are persecuted here, we have to do something, whereas here, it feels that people are kind of okay with the way things are. Where is that coming from? Is that historical, philosophical?
Do you, just to maybe make that a bit more precise, do you see that reflected in
Canadian content,
coverage?
yes, in social media, as opposed
Okay.
to American media, where journalists already made a transition into YouTube, into Twitter. That's where my content and the content of young people I know, my students, they get it from there. Nobody gets from a newspaper. And the content we get there is like, yeah, Americans are on something, they're on a mission. I mean, they feel almost persecuted culturally. Whereas here, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Right? What's up with that?
So do we have to sharpen our razor a bit, I guess?
So they have conversations we don't have up here. And some of them get ugly and nasty,
Yeah.
but we don't
It's
just.
part of the fight of the gospel, right? You have to fight, you have to, exactly what you're saying. I mean, when I'm a teacher, and I say to a guy, you know, defending the church is not difficult. When you answer back, when they're critical without reason, they stop. They think before talking. I mean, as a professor, they know me as a Catholic, you know, and they, instead of having a target on my back, they're a little bit afraid of, you know, because, yeah, I would say, like, who said that? You say that? Where are the references coming from? You know, simple things like that people, they are not accustomed to hear. Right?
It's
So
interesting.
that happens in the States.
Yeah,
right?
it's interesting you say that, because those are two of my favorite sentences in the world. Who says so? You?
Yeah, exactly.
What does everyone else think? I mean, are we too namby-pamby, too soft here? Should we sharpen our pencils, if not our razors?
I would
That's
say,
what the gospel will say. That is, sorry, it's a hospital, it's a field hospital, what Pope Francis, right? A field hospital. We have to get there, right? So
You're saying you need to put more people in the hospital?
Church has to be like a field hospital.
Oh,
Listen,
just trying to think through the medical.
I already everything. No, Francis said, I want a church that is like a field hospital.
Yeah.
He said it, right? We have to get there. We have to have our hands there, right?
so that's okay, no, it's perfect. Well, for most of my life, I'm American educated. I never went to school in Canada. I was born in Hong Kong. I'm completely US educated since high school till my graduate program. I would probably respond to your questions. It's part of culture. It's ingrained in the education system. We are taught, you go get this. It's you first. It's me first. I find it Canadian, I've been in Canada for 30 years, so I'm Canadianized now, I'm too soft. We are polite in comparison to American in general speaking terms. I think it's the culture, it's part of the education system, how we are teaching each generations. Because my son is born here, so he is part of Canadian culture. So I expect him to be a typical Canadian, to be a little bit nice, a little more gentle, a little more patient. Americans not very patient. And I think we see it south of the border right now in today's climate. They're just not patient, doesn't matter which side of the region. That's just who that culture is. In comparison to an Asian culture tends to be even softer. My dad in Hong Kong was involved in diocese in Hong Kong. But in general speaking terms, Catholic in Hong Kong, same thing. They are not confrontational. They even, I said, even a couple more steps behind us in Canada. Of course, the American is probably 6 steps.
How's the church doing there?
They try to be.
Thriving? Is it flourishing?
It is because, I think it is flourishing because in the history in Hong Kong, again, it's been 40 years since we lived there. A lot of the schools, majority of schools in Hong Kong are Catholic schools. They're done by a lot of missions from the European time, Spanish, Italian. So it's ingrained in that culture. So they are not fighting anything, but it's also recognized that the church is the biggest church. And like it or not, since 1997, it's a little bit political now with the government.
Well, here we have things to fight, right? Assisted suicide, abortion.
Yeah, they don't fight that.
Yeah.
So did you want to jump in on this, or is there something else?
Yeah, I do. I live in the US. So my question to you guys actually kind of follow up is the following. How do you apply in your work the social doctrine of the church? And I'll give you an example just to give you both of it. So people were picking up on the latest encyclical right away, and some Catholic writers like Sharabi writes about how the whole encyclical is about AI. I could not help myself when I responded and said, I don't think so, it's about human dignity. So what criteria do you use, if you use any point of reference, to really judge when you're working how well your work meets those highest criteria of reflecting the social doctrine of the church, aka Christ's teaching?
Well, if I can just jump in, and then the standard I use is one I learned, and Paul's heard this story before because I use it a lot, but I learned on the first day of my career as a daily newspaper writer, reporter. I was working in a small town in southeastern Alberta, and a pipe truck hit a school bus and killed 5 kids. And I rushed out to the scene with the photographer, because the photographer always drives. And when we arrived, as we were getting out of the car, Frank Weber, who was born and raised in Medicine Hat, with a long family roots there, he turned and looked at me and said, "Go easy, kid. Everybody knows everybody around here. Don't be an asshole." And you could get a doctorate in journalism, or at least a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University, and you wouldn't have a better formation for conscience from that, and for Catholic conscience, because that sentence, that was a long time ago, but that sentence is stuck in my head as the essence of treating people as human beings. This is a community. These are people who've lost their children. Don't forget that. And maybe that was somewhat at work in not taking that. I mean, there are tons of examples. I won't bore you, but that's my litmus test. Am I with Frank Weber now, getting out of that car, and am I going to act like an a-hole? No, I'm not.
Yeah, so I think that touches everything. Is getting back to the idea of finding the person within the story, not the statistic or what the headline is. Recently I covered a story about a mother who had lost her son in a motorcycle accident, and all I could think about was she would go on her sort of process of grieving. She was renovating a monastery in Croatia. She started a GoFundMe donation to renovate this monastery, which is how we had heard about the story. And all I could think about is, if I were with maybe a more secular paper, that article would have been about the motorcycle crash or this horrible accident. Instead, my understanding of Catholic journalism and Catholic social teaching allowed the story to be about a mother's love, or about this project that she was doing for her son. So it's just all about really how you frame it. I think there's a lot of ways in where maybe there's an easier story out there maybe that's why we miss the headlines, because it's probably faster to get the easier story or what the better story, or not the better story, what the easier story would be. But the better story that's promoting human dignity, human life, all of those Catholic social teachings, you just have to sort of look for it within those stories. That's what I do, at least.
Going back to the earlier question about the US, Canada, the church, etc., like a couple of thoughts come to mind. I mean, I wonder to a certain extent it's rooted actually just in history and culture. So, like, how many Catholic prime ministers have we had, for better or for worse, but how many Catholic, whereas for there to be a Catholic president would evoke, so there's a kind of a certain degree to which the church and the history of the church in Canada is almost institutionalized in our culture here in a way that makes people comfortable. I mean, I think even compared to even though there's obviously more Catholics in the US, as a percentage of the population, we're actually higher percentage of the population in Canada as Catholics than, and we tend to be also less interested in the culture wars generally. We're all Catholic, and the average Catholic in the pew maybe is not going to get fired up and want to go, as long as they can live their faith happily they're not interested in they don't feel threatened by the dominant culture, even though there would be a good argument that they are, but they don't feel it, so they're less engaged to kind of go put people in the hospital.
I didn't say that.
That's well said, and I'll add two things to that. That modal Catholic in the United States who's more fired up about their faith is also probably more fired up about work, more fired up about cultural consumption, about materialism, about getting into the right college. It's a more fired up place. Frankly.
But where that comes from?
Because the United States, now I'm speaking as an American literature professor, has been in an argument with itself about what it is and what it's supposed to be since 1776. All men are created equal and we get to own some of them. From the very beginning, there have been these tensions in the United States. Canada is a consensus-based model. We had no war of independence. We had a conversation and a negotiation into a dominion status. I mean, so much of our national qualities encourage the fired up model and the consensus-based model. But there's one other element here, the total collapse of Quebec Catholicism. It would seem to me that if we could kind of go back a few decades, the intellectual life of Catholicism in Canada was largely supplied by a thriving French Catholicism at the elite level. I know Duplessis, blah, 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 Quiet Revolution, everybody just forced to go to church. I understand the cultural argument. But if you think about how thriving French Catholicism in its Quebec form would have been, that supplied, I think, an intellectual life that Anglo-Catholicism in Canada just hasn't been able to. Present company excluded in all of our efforts. That's the other big difference, I think, is that collapse has had a lot of effects.
And on top of that, probably, as you were saying, the sense of being persecuted, that still you find in American mindset. And these guys were brutalized until fairly recently. Something like that didn't happen in Canada, and not to that extent anyways. As you say, it was institutionalized. We are accustomed to the Catholics. In America, it wasn't the case.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a scholarship on anti-Catholicism in that country.
Sure.
You can teach that, right? There are courses, you can get a degree on that. It's not the same situation here.
No, it's true, and just picking up on what Randy was saying, there's an interesting dichotomy within that, what you illuminated there, Randy, in that, Quebec in 1911, Henri Boyagoda says Quebec as a beacon of light for a French Catholic in North America. But North America becomes circumscribed to the boundaries of Quebec, before there's Quebec. You get Leonard Roux in the 30s saying, no, we should not, the Confederation was a mistake, we should not have any trade with the Anglos. Just retreat in behind, and then when it collapses, it really collapses. But so that intellectual tradition that you're talking about is really, by and large, circumscribed within the boundaries of modern Quebec. They go down to Lowell, Massachusetts, but that's the...
But the point I think we make, and this has to do with maybe a certain secular blindness in Canada, is if you think about for how many decades we've understood Canadian attention as French English. it's also Catholic Protestant.
Yeah.
When those categories meant something.
Yeah.
You know, why do we have publicly funded Catholic schools? That has to do with the terms of confederation, you know, that aren't there in the United States. So,
That's right.
very different, I think it's just very different cultures.
But that culture was an inch deep. I don't know how long.
Well, that was my point earlier about the.
It was everywhere, and then it was gone. Because there was no depth to it.
Last question, because I think we're going to get the hook quickly here, but I just want to put to everybody, how much do you feel that, whether it's this advent of AI or conventional newspapers, radio, television, is actually a manipulative force in your lives? That it leads you to think, or at least conduct yourselves in a certain way. And I'll append a very, very quick illustration of why I'm asking that. I encountered some group of young people, probably 2 years ago now, about 2 years ago, who we were talking about these kinds of issues, and they said they were hiking when I don't know if it's this phrase, but the first attempted assassination of Trump occurred. And they were completely out of touch with any of their gadgets, right? They did support where they were. They were astonished when they came out and learned that something had happened that they didn't know about instantaneously, and were in some form formed by instantaneously. And one of them, I remember, said, and it's to that issue of formation, if I didn't know right away, a friend of mine would, and she would have told me. That the instant communication is not just what happens on here, it's the pass along. So we can think that we're not being manipulated, but I wonder how strong is your sense as a group? I mean, you're here at a media, you're obviously at some level in interest. What do you think? Do you feel you have the means, put the question a different way, do you feel you have the means to resist that kind of stuff, to say, no, look, what they're talking about is jibber jabber, I don't care? Does that question make sense?
Well, just to add to that, maybe, like, I was also up north during Trump's first assassination, the first assassination attempt on Trump, but I also didn't hear about it right away. Versus comparing that to when Charlie Kirk was assassinated and was following tweet by tweet, like, is he alive? And feeling you had some sort of stake in that.
Yeah.
So.
And what did that feel like when you came out and you didn't know something monumental had happened and you didn't know instantaneously? Because you're in the back.
Or more importantly, did you feel great following those tweets? Was that giving you squirts of pleasure because you're connected to this event? Or was it just an excuse to keep playing with your phone?
No, like it felt like my attention was like the best way that I could communicate investment in Charlie Kirk and his survival.
Just gonna refresh.
Yeah.
This is just from my experience, also this week, but I got this as my phone, and this I have no data access on here, and I use it in the car. And when I don't, I have to bring it in the house, say, because I have to scan a check from work, and I need that to deposit it. And now I've got it in the house, and I have it in bed at night or something, so I plug in. It is, I just feel like it is so impressive to me, and I'm constantly having to remember, I don't know what's going on, I only know what I'm being told. It's a bodily experience of a kind of oppression.
For Lent this year, I deleted all my news apps off my phone, and I'm never going back.
I think it's also
Still don't plug on the world, by the way. But no social media, no news apps.
How to say it? The experience of disincarnated relationship to reality versus an incarnated relationship to reality. Like a talk I was at once, and a line that stuck with me is, how do we preach an incarnate God in an increasingly disincarnate world? So to be following tweet by tweet somebody, which by necessity you have because you can't be there incarnate, but it's fundamentally different to be following something like that in a disincarnated way than it is to be at somebody's bedside as they're dying in physical. So that's what I find challenging, is we're increasingly invited through these devices to connect to reality in disincarnate ways, partially because it just allows us also, you can't physically be in as many places as these devices allow us to quote unquote be, but it's a different type of being. When I shrink my worldview or my relationship to reality to the size of a cell phone screen, I don't know how to say it, it's a different experience than when I'm in the flesh, like a conversation.
I would disagree with, not even disagree with, but just nuance with that is the verb. I don't think we're invited. I think we're seduced and we're bathed. And like Luke doesn't know a life without being in that bath. Most of us in this room do. We knew when the TV was on and when the TV was off. We knew when the radio was on and when the radio was off. We're reading the news saying, what's that idiot Stockland saying? Throw a paper over your shoulder, whatever you do with it. But he doesn't. I'm guessing you probably don't either. So if it was an invitation, it would be one thing. If it's a seduction or you're being bathed in it, it's an entire, like everything else you said, I totally, absolutely. But we're not even just being invited anymore. We know the difference of us all.
We do have a choice. We do have a choice.
You have a choice, but you have to make that choice.
You have to make that choice.
There are limits to that individual choice because you can absolutely make those individual choices. Like I've never had those apps on my device, but there are in the same way we were talking about individual sin and social sin. Like there are social structures, and Catholic social teaching has a lot to say about that too. And I mean, the devil's the defaults when it comes to these things. So even if you make all those individual choices, whether or not we're being seduced as a society depends on the kind of technology that's mainstream and being built. And I think that Catholic social teaching has had a lot to say about unregulated multinational corporations when it comes to the economy. But when it comes to technology, our technology is being built by companies that embody the opposite of those principles.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.